Hi, all. Welcome to the panel for Bi Plus Masculinities. Eventually, I'm going to ask our three wonderful guests to talk amongst each other about the topics they have at hand. And while they're thinking about that, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. First up, I'm proud to welcome Sam Lawton-Westerland, who's been with us in the bisexual research group since the beginning, basically. He is a lecturer at the University of Glasgow School of Social and Political Sciences. Previously, the PhD work was entitled Bi Plus Men and Their Intimate Partners, Identities, Relationships, and Binegativity. That was completed, just last year. Congratulations, Sam. The PhD scholarship was awarded by the Economic and Social Research Council through the open competition. And Sam currently works on the Bisexuality Today survey project funded by the Independent Social Research Foundation. And Sam, I hope I brought up the correct bio there.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks, Derek.
We welcome back Rob Cohen, who did grace us with his presence last year. Robert Brooks Cohen is a writer, creator, comedian, and life and relationship coach. He spent 7 seasons writing for Law and Order SVU, and he created Two Bi Guys, a podcast about sexual and gender fluidity. His first book, Bisexual Married Men, Stories of Relationships, Acceptance, and Authenticity, was published by Routledge in 2023. Welcome, Rob. And last but not least, we have Aurelio Castro, who is a social psychologist and bi plus activist working in the construction of sexual orientation and bi plus sexualities. They co-organized the first Bi Plus Pride and Visibility Day in Italy while completing a PhD on the experiences of bi plus and heterosexual men regarding their stories of desire, masculinity, intimacies, and non-monogamies. In 2023, he launched and edited the first Italian book on bi politics and research called Politiche della Bisexualità oltre la vita della persona bisexuale, pansexuale e queer for ETS edizione. Apologies for my awful Italian, but you know who's not an awful Italian? Aurelio Castro. Welcome. At times, I might ask our guests some questions, and I'll just pick one of you at first just to have someone in order between you who would answer first, but questions would be meant for all three of you. And again, you are encouraged to talk amongst each other as you are the experts in the room. The first question will be directed at first at Sam. We have created this bisexual research conference, and we run this across many themes. Let me brusquely and sarcastically ask you, Sam, what are we dedicating 2 hours to talk about bi plus men? What say you?
Why are we dedicating this much time to talk about bi plus men? Well, I would go back to I really appreciate your brusque and sarcastic questioning style. Like it's very me. And yeah, I love it. So thanks, Derek. When I was doing my PhD, there a lot of the literature on bisexuality was created by and about bisexual women, and you know that's no bad thing at all. I mean, you can see that we've got Robin Knox here, and yeah, and I think that was a wonderful thing, and I would say the kind of earlier literature maybe had a lot more on theorizing the social position of bi plus women. And in the kind of like journey of doing my PhD, writing my thesis, it was really about sort of one, discovering that in large scale attitudinal surveys in the US that bi plus men these were nationally representative surveys, that bi plus men, bisexual men, as the surveys coded them, were consistently rated lower than by women. There's specific reasons to do with fetishization, I think, that can explain those differences. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing that bi women were consistently rated more favorably, but that was a kind of interesting thing. So I guess in answer to your question, it's comes down to a question of epistemology, I suppose, like where that knowledge came from, um, where knowledge about bisexuality came from, and what and who was, you know, who was that knowledge theorizing about, and there was just more on bisexual women than there has been about bisexual men. When I started my PhD, there wasn't, like, for example, like Banit Mehta's book, that hadn't come out yet. There's been a big explosion of of uh, of knowledge about bisexual men in particular. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and I'm just going to pass it immediately to Rob. Rob, why talk about men?
I mean, that's sort of been why I got into this space in the first place, is similar to what Sam said, is that as I was coming out about 7, 8 years ago, I just didn't see many bi men, and I didn't see much content or talks or research or focus. There was some, you could find it here and there, but I started the Two Bi Guys podcast because of that. All the bi podcasts at the time were by women, and some of them were great, but they weren't speaking to our experience. And just, bi people are the most hidden in the LGBT community, but bi men are the most hidden subset. I wish we had newer statistics on this, but the statistics that I always cite are about 12 to 14% of bi men are actually out to most people in their lives. It's a very low number, and for bi women, it's only slightly higher. It's like 28% or 30%, I think. And so, gay and lesbian people, 70 something percent are out. And I also noticed in writing my book, or in doing the podcast, which is why I wrote my book about bi married men, is that, like, a lot of our listeners were around my age or older, like millennials or older. And because of how they grew up in the world we lived in, something like 90% of bi men end up in relationships or marriages with women. So it's even more hidden. It's even more, they're in straight passing relationships. They don't have to come out. And they're struggling with that. And that was why I wrote the book, and why I'm coaching bi men now. And that is just a theme that comes up over and over, is that we don't know any other bi men. I mean, I've started to connect with some, but many people just coming out or accepting this, they don't know other people. They're looking for that connection in that community, and it's just really hard to find. So it's great that we are doing a lot of time on this topic, I think.
Chris or Aurelio, please round us out here.
Okay, well, thanks for the question, and I'm really happy and proud to be here. I will say that I started talking about masculinities and bisexualities a bit out of rage of seeing my identity constantly challenged and delegitimized in gay and lesbian spaces and in queer spaces in general. And I was asking, like, why isn't psychology talking in a positive way about bisexual and pansexual men, if they talk about it at all? So my journey kind of started not just as a pan-bisexual man more than 20 years ago, but more just like I wanted to understand what damage, I would say, terrible practices and research question in psychology and social and medical sciences in general, what kind of damages have done to our community and on what premises. So I would say that we kind of need to talk about bi plus men, since there have been a lot and so many terrible, I would say, trials to say that they don't exist, to prove that they are not worthy, that they are not stable, or they just going through a phase. And although, of course, as men and cisgender bisexual men who have a lot of privilege in a patriarchal society, it's still like we face a lot of oppression due to our queer identity. And I think since society wants so much to erase the existence of bisexualities and pansexualities in general, I think that talking about bi plus men it can surely damage this hegemonic notion. And I do love to give this kind of hegemony a challenge by just, we are existing as bi plus men, both cisgender, transgender, or masculine, bi plus people, and non-binary people. And I think they don't like it at all. So I say, yeah, let's do it. Let's say, no, we not it's not only that we exist, is that we want our queerness, and we are queer. So that's why I think we have to talk about it.
Thank you, Aurelio. I always enjoy hearing that activist in you. I think next I'll direct a question first at Rob. You last year had just published your book, and I'm seeing in this audience a bunch of people who are likewise aspiring towards publishing and maybe writing a culmination of their own. Can you tell us what's it been like in the years since you're publishing?
It's been really interesting to hear the feedback from people. I mean, it just goes back to what I said a minute ago, that people are looking for these connections and to find validation and acceptance, because so many, I think, especially men, go through this stuff alone, and maybe they know gay men, but they just can't find other bi men. So I can't tell you how many notes and messages I've got from people just saying, oh my God, this story is exactly like me. So my book is an oral history. It's not a strictly scientific study, but it is sort of sociological research. It's an oral history with 13 different men, so 13 different stories. I edited it, but it's their words. And just so many people connected with different stories. I tried to have varied stories, and I get messages from people saying like they were in tears in the coffee shop reading this book because of one thing that somebody said that was the first time they heard it, validated, and it was exactly how they've thought about it. And now I'm doing life coaching mostly for bi men, and most of the guys coming to me have found me through the book, and the stuff that's going on in there is exactly what they're struggling with. So if you are trying to publish what you're working on, I highly encourage it. We need more of this out there. There's I think like a dearth of research about bi men. The statistics I cite are like 10, 15 years old. I wish we had new ones. And Routledge is a really good publisher. I liked them for this kind of stuff.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I agree. To a lighter version, by telling people I work with this group, I have coworkers who come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm bi too. Just don't tell anybody."
Yeah.
And they'll eventually find your podcast and they'll consider coming out.
Yeah. Well, I
Really,
do doing stand-up comedy now, and that's one of my jokes, is that so few bi men are out, that if you come out, a lot of people come out of the woodwork and come out to you and only you. And I feel like a bi priest or something, like I'm running confessionals now, because people, and that's the story. Like if you come out, you probably will realize other people in your life are also bi that you didn't know, and putting yourself out there is sort of the only way to find out.
Thank you. We are now all picturing a bi priest. Aurelio, same question. What's it been like in a year since working on that book?
Well, yeah, the book was called, and don't worry about the Italian, it's a totally complicated language. It was about politics of bisexuality, so beyond the visibility of bisexual, pansexual, and queer people. And there I wanted to talk a lot about how constantly bisexuality has been erased over the time of the course, and that we have to reclaim like a radical and political identity as bisexual. So the idea is that like it doesn't been so long since 2005 there was this terrible article, Gay, Straight or Lying, in where Rieger and other researchers tried to prove that male bisexual don't exist, no, because we don't have 50-50% of attraction. And it's always baffled me how, regardless of whether bisexual studies since the 90s have said that we have attractions and desire to more than one gender, or even regardless of gender for pansexual, it's like some some studies, some scholars are really focused on this 50-50. To be a bisexual, to be a bi plus man, you have to have sex with men and women, sometimes together, or you have like to have a push set, doing 20 push-ups, or you cannot be bisexual. They always try to invent new ways in which to prove that we don't exist. And so I wanted us to understand how is it doing, because although I think it's important that we kind of debunk the stereotypes, no? I also wrote about this, like, oh, we are not necessarily promiscuous. Yes, many of us are polyamorous or non-monogamous, but not all of us, but that's not a negative thing. And sometimes we tend like to reassure partners, people, our parents, our children, that like, oh, don't worry, yes, dad is bisexual, that doesn't mean he's going to betray your other parent, or we are not confused, or we are not afraid. And that's okay, because I think we need some reassurance, and everybody needs some reassurance and validity. But at the same time, it's not that we always have to, I think, at least in my experience, we don't always have to reassure others. It's not about stability. As Shiri Asner said many times in her revolutionary books, Bi Notes for a Bisexual Revolution, instability is not a bad thing per se. My attraction are fluid over the time. I feel desire for people of different genders with different gender characteristics over the course of, the people I met. And I think we have to spin the narrative and say, are your attraction, like to monosexual people, are your attraction really that rigid, really that fixated on just one characteristics or one type of genital? Because people do a lot of, a lot of nice things to each other, not necessarily when they have alcohol. And I think it's time that we, as bi plus communities, we ask other people, like, yeah, just prove to me that you are not bisexuals. Because while I don't think that everybody is bi, because I think that will erase the conversation on people who are actually bi plus right now. I do think that, like, yeah, maybe you are the one going through a phase. Maybe heterosexuality is a phase all along towards another identity. So we wanted to give some also scientific and political validation to this, because we need political autonomy, because we are independent. We don't want to be assimilated to homosexual or other categories. Nothing wrong, of course, about being gay or lesbian, but we want our fair representation, I think.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And echoing your words, and also what our illustrious founder, Julia Shaw, said at the beginning, reminding us that we do have a scale, we do have a spectrum, or maybe what the comedian science teacher just said earlier, why are we counting everything? Nevertheless, I am the data scientist in the room, and I do care about data. Speaking of statistics, Sam, can you tell us about the troubles of gathering such data?
Okay. There's a link to my thesis there. Statistics. I have a big problem with statistics. I am quite critical of quantitative research. I did mention some quantitative research. That was probably the only quantitative research that I did. So my research was qualitative. So what I did was I interviewed bisexual men and their partners. Some of them had multiple partners. And basically like wrote a book about that from the perspective of a bisexual man. So that was the way that I gathered my data. I was going to talk to other bisexual men and their partners, sometimes individually, sometimes together, about their experiences of being a bi man. And their experiences of their relationships and things like that. So, it was interesting going back to some of the things that Rob has said. The very first person that I interviewed said, "Oh, it's nice to meet you. You're the only other bi man that I've ever met." So that was a big sort of finding in and of itself, that people. But bi men can be very isolated. I'm not saying that's all bi men's experience. But yeah, it's a complicated one. I've sort of like gone off track a little bit. But yeah, hopefully that explains a little bit about
Oh, no
how
worries.
that's-
I mean, I knew that your answer would be better than my Google searches. So thank you for all your work there.
That's right.
In general, we do a conference like this because during the year it is difficult for us to all come together and talk to each other and get a sense of where we're at. For you three men, well, at this time, were there any questions you wanted to ask another one of you on the panel?
No, I mean, nothing comes to mind immediately as a question, but Sam, I've been following you for a while, and I need to read your thesis because it sounds very overlapping with mine, and I'm curious if we found similar stuff. And well, let me ask you this, because something I found, I was interviewing people about their marriages and their relationships, but I asked them sort of how did they grow up and when did they realize they were bi and how and stuff like that. And pretty much all of them, I mean, it was only 13 people, it was a very small sample size, but pretty much all of them had some kind of non-conforming, like they didn't conform with certain aspects of masculinity growing up. And they often noticed that before they had any attractions to anyone and sexuality came into play. Like they talked about looking back at being interested in girls' toys or different, like the color pink or purple, like things that were not quite seen as masculine, especially 10, 20, 30 years ago growing up. And that was one of the things I didn't expect to find in my interviews because I was focused on marriages. And pretty much everyone had some story like that about non-conforming masculinity. So I guess I'm curious if either of you also have noticed that.
That's interesting. So I didn't like ask any specific. This is one of the strange things. The way I designed my research was that I didn't ask any specific questions about binegativity. So I didn't ask any about any experiences of like bad things that had happened to people because of their sexual identity or the way that they presented themselves. And I didn't really ask any questions about masculinity. And the masculinity stuff kind of like sort of was a sort of post. It's just my kind of like, I don't know. What I found was that actually I interviewed like slightly more people than you. I think I interviewed so I think it was like 17 bi men, and it was like 24 people overall because some of those were their partners. What I found is like there's loads of diversity, right? Like, and there kind of like wasn't. It was a bit of a nightmare to analyze because there kind of wasn't this common narrative. There were some commonalities, but like bisexuality, bi people, bi plus people, are like really diverse. I like, and there's an incredible diversity of experiences, and things like that. So there were like certain threads that seemed to go together, but I don't know. I don't know if I did find similar things to you in terms of that. But yeah, I'm also curious to read your book. And Aurelio, I totally identify with like just writing a book out of rage because like this was like my whole one of the things I didn't mention, right? Okay, when we were talking about why create knowledge about bi men, bi plus men, was I read a book which was called The Changing Dynamics of Bisexual Men's Lives by Eric Anderson and Mark McCormack. And I hated this book. I just like absolutely hated it because it was like yeah, it just seemed like it was published in 2016 and it's like literally like as the world is going to shit. Like and it's the whole narrative of the book is that like things are so great for bi men now. Like things are like wonderful now. And I was just like I disagree. So yeah, that's kind of like where I was coming from was I wanted to like start a fight basically academically speaking about who is speaking for bi men's experiences. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Derek. I think that for all of us, like working on talking about masculinities, 2016 was a terrible year, not only for the US election, but of course also for the rise of the manosphere. And that led to so much hegemonic masculinity scripts all around in these courses. So yeah, I do agree that like things have not been optimistic ever since. More bi plus men are coming out. We're talking more about bi plus men. I think that's a positive thing. But in general, being a feminist, being a male feminist, regardless whether you're cis male, trans male, non-binary person, has become way more difficult, and there's way more hate online, I think. But regarding your kind of original question, I work mostly on the narrative stories of bi plus people, and during my thesis, yes, I did on both actually bi plus men and also some straight men or non-exclusively straight men, and actually asked them. There's some results on non-monogamous men are published on the Archives of Sexual Behavior now. A lot to say about the journal, but in 2021, I published this a part of my research on their narratives and stories, how they made sense of their polyamory or for their bisexuality or their heterosexuality. And I think that if I have to find some common ground for bi plus men, it's about those who had the feeling of these desires since they were young, and they had a lot of sexual attraction. Yes, I can imagine that off were non-monogamous relationships, and the others who actually started developing these feelings after some real emotional collection. So that is relevant to what Lisa Diamond's research on sexual fluidity comes into play, and that actually is really interesting because it furthers the conversation on like, yes, you might have a certain understanding of your sexuality now, but things can change. Never taking away any sexuality, but just you can meet people that can make you, feel something that wasn't there before. And for many bi plus men, they arrive, maybe they had something that were not fitted too much on the kind of hegemonic stereotyped male. And I relate kind of to that, like that kind of masculinity was not, because it's really homophobic, hegemonic masculinity is really homophobic, and since you might have some at least intimacy with other men, they don't like that. So, but I think actually bi plus men they do feel something is different, generally. So I think, yeah, they do kind of come into understanding these feelings with maybe some internalized biphobia, maybe they find some support network, and it's kind of harder because they don't have any example. Anteros Padova is a great association here in Italy. They do some bisexual support group, and mostly bisexual men come to support groups because they feel they don't have the resources, because hegemonic masculinity deprives men on the ability to rely on others and to ask for help. Of course, we also have our privileges, and there's a lot to say about this. But I think, yes, it's important to have this kind of conversation, like where do they start? How do we make sense? So I asked my participant, where does bisexuality come into play in your life? And I also asked this to heterosexual people, but that's another conversation.
Can I jump in on that? That's really interesting. It sounds like all our research is similar in some ways in terms of it being narrative and about people's stories and more qualitative. What you just said makes me think of something that is on my mind and struggling with, and I think related to this discussion of masculinity, which is like this idea of your identity versus your attractions and interests. Like the book that got me to realize I was bi and come out is a book called Not Gay: Sex Between Straight White Men by Jane Ward. I can see you've read it.
Of course.
Like that was my bi Bible, even though it's not really a book about bisexual. I mean, it is a book about bisexuality, but it's about men who are sort of still choosing the straight label despite this desire for queer contact. And it's about how they're relating to that contact. Are they embracing it and accepting it and making it part of their identity? Or are they saying this is, something else? But it's also something I found in my podcast and my coaching, just how many bi men are like identify as a 1 or a 2 on a Kinsey scale, as opposed to more in the middle. It's so common, and we can probably spend hours talking about the reasons for that, cultural and societal and age-wise, but there's so many men, especially in marriages with women, who are looking for, they're not looking to leave their marriage, they're happy with their wives, or maybe they're more romantically attracted to women, but they're looking to explore their sexuality with men in certain ways. And I think it's connected to their masculinity and expressing that masculinity in a way that has not been allowed for so long. And there's so many straight men doing that too. And the confines of masculinity, they sort of allow you to have gay sex as long as you say, well, I was drunk, or it wasn't important, or it was a college hazing ritual. There's these like things you can slot that into to make it make sense within straightness. And so, I mean, I struggle with like, okay, at what point why do we call ourselves bi, and what do we call those people, and what's the importance of their choice and the identity label? But either way, it just, I think, shows how much desire there is for male contact, like even if it's not sexual, just touch and intimacy and friendship and bonding. Like there's things that are not allowed within masculinity that men really are looking for and desiring. And then when you actually pursue that, it brings up these questions of sexuality. And I mean, it would take an hour to get into that, but that's just I'll throw that out there.
Great book, and I had some trouble sometimes reading it when they describe the hazing ritual, but it's really, really fun. Yes, as Derek said, it's the definitely the no homo meme, but like doing a PhD research about this. Jane Worthy is amazing on this. No, totally. And I think it's also important to point out that, yes, we're talking about masculinity, but masculinity is only for men. Masculinity is something that is a construct, something that is also for women, it's also for non-binary people. There's many that sometimes bi plus men find difficulty is understanding that there's not one model of being of masculinity, or being a man for that matter. And I think it's both just the plurality, like, yes, we can have reflexive, we can have queer masculinity, there's not a straight, we can have the Black, the Asian, the disabled, the non-binary masculinity, and the butch masculinity is like Jake Halberstam has talked a lot. And I think that giving this plurality helps a lot in deconstructing the notion of gender and our socialization, in even starting to tackle the privileges that we have. Maybe we're less fetishized, I can never pronounce that word right, that bi plus women, of course. We still have some, I think, issues that we have to get on, and I don't think we exist just because there's the Pornhub category for bisexual men.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the lead on the masculinities theme. That was definitely where we were headed next anyhow. For this next one, I'll start by directing this at Aurelio. Over the past few years, you and I talked a bit about how the governments in our respective countries have been going towards the right, becoming more conservative. If you're willing to share, how has the changing political winds affected you, your friends, and your academic circle? And of course, you could work this back in with masculinity.
Thank you, Derek. We have a very nostalgic fascist government right now, so I would say it's not really a great time. It's a long discourse, but I'll try to be brief. So right now, our government is passing legislation to prohibit any kind of manifestation, even pacific ones, like an anti-Gandhi bill, and any kind of protest against genocides in occupied Palestine, against environmental crisis, against, for a union protest, anything is going to be prohibited or make unlawful by this bill. So we live in a kind of state of deep preoccupation and fear for a democratic state, and that's not even good for queer people. of course, because there's currently an attack on transgender people and trans kids, and even academic freedom is being challenged right now. Like we had some colleagues doing research on trans youth in Rome, and the whole government and ultra-religious groups recently, like a week ago, attacked this research. And many Center of Gender Studies and universities have come forward to protect the freedom of research. So it's not really a good time. And also on the idea that like same gender families should not exist. There's an attack on parents, and an attack also of gay, lesbian, bi, and trans parents. So I guess a lot of changes in a few years, but at the same time, it's like new activists, new groups, and some bisexual activism is rising across Italy, and people, I think, have recognized that like we have to come together as a community, and at an intersectional level. It's not only about queer people, it's also about migrants, it's about workers, it's about the right to have a house. And of course, I see that from both a scholar and activist background, but it's like, it's not like we can do free research when we don't have a contract or we are punished or persecuted for our research topics, regardless of our position on those. So yeah, I think also this kind of preoccupation is spreading across the states, across other Western and non-Western countries. And I think that we have to take part and action of this conversation. Since us bi plus men, we might have more money, we have more, of course, more position, we might have something to lose, but I mean, we don't have nothing to lose but our chains and this. So I think that this political landscape is ever changing, and I think that we have to stay together as a community.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam, thank you for your contribution also with that resource in the chat. But at this moment, do you also wish to talk about the politicalization?
Me specifically, yeah, I don't know, I'm just gonna be really frank. Fuck all governments everywhere. Like when in Europe, right, we had this like liberal kind of time where we were seeing a lot of progress. You know, I'm using air quotes that you can't see because my camera's broken. When we had all this progress, we still had, you know, people being, you know, a lot of governments in Europe, liberal governments who were, you know, who were very, you know, on the one hand, sort of friendly to a particular type of like queer person, like basically what's called a homonormative sort of subject, sexual citizenship, we call it in academic literature. While that was happening, like there was still, you know, a lot of like violence that was going on, you know, towards people who didn't fit that description, who were, you know, within you know, within the LGBT community and without it as well. Like Aurelia mentioned, migrants, you know, what we're seeing now is only an acceleration on what has been like a campaign against, you know, migrants, you know, in Europe and beyond, that was happening when it was supposedly the good times, you know, when we were starting to see different change. So yeah, things are really, politics is very messy. As you can tell, I have quite radical politics, because I've seen the ways in which activists have tried really hard to work with governments and then just be betrayed, essentially. Like think about trans activists, right? And like just trying for decades to get trans healthcare enshrined in law, and then, oh no, we're just gonna, you know, and then basically the political winds shift and there's a massive like international moral panic against, like, you know, against trans people in particular, which affects all of us. It affects all of us within the LGBTQIA plus community and beyond. So yeah, that's like my that's my take on you were mentioning politics. I have the same politics roughly as Sherry Eisner, and you know, I'm not the first bisexual person to to make these kind of arguments. But yeah, I'll let Rob speak if you've got any.
Yes, thank you for sharing all that with us, Sam. And yes, Rob, let me just ask you in a half kidding way. Tell me something about America I don't know.
It's very stressful right now for the next 30 to 31 days, fingers crossed. But and my politics are also basically Shiri Eisner's. I read that book and I was like, oh, this is how I think about everything, spelled out exactly for me perfectly. But I don't have much to add on that topic. I think that was really interesting and well said. The opinion that I'll add is that I do think that cisgender masculine presenting bi men have a very important responsibility right now. Like in the upcoming election in America, men are leaning toward Trump and women are way leaning toward Kamala. And so men sort of need examples of different types of masculinity and sexuality, and like the manosphere stuff. It really, I mean, all of us need to fight against that and counteract it. But cis masculine presenting bi men I see as sort of a unique bridge between this type of progressive queer politics and that Trumpiness. And there may be people we can reach, given our experience and our presentation, that other people may not be able to reach these guys. And so I think we just have a really important responsibility to, as much as we can and are safe to, be visible, be vulnerable, share the ways we've been brought into this work and this type of politics, because I think people can see it and hear it in a certain way that's powerful.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. Although, yes, we have to remember that at least we have a lot of hegemonic and troubling situation, both like for us European, at least for studied Italian, like looking at the States is like you have the right, the extreme right, and you have the center right more like than we, like even in Italy, we lack a real left wing or fully liberal party. And I think that's the main problem. Like if you want something more, you're labeled as someone who is disruptive. But like it's okay, it's great to be disruptive. We have to tip the balance in another direction, since there's extremist discourses on the right. And I think that's a really important thing, because regardless of who wins, there are subjectivities who are outside of the norm, non-binary, gender queer, gender non-conforming people that are still not cared for due to systemic oppression, due to capitalistic society. And then we have, of course, we have to talk about masculinity, we have to talk about class. And because sometimes when we talk about polyamory, like today, Maria Pallotta Chiaroli talked about Christian Class. There's this really great book, The Spectre of Promiscuity, where they talk about the differences in class and economic privileges within non-monogamous relationship. And I think that's also a discourse that we should have even for larger movements for rights, because we are not, maybe we are in the same storm, but we are not definitely in the same boats all the time. And then it could be an uncomfortable discourse. I feel sometimes when I talk to gay and lesbian activists, they do feel uncomfortable when I present to them a bit of history of bi-erasure and transphobia in the history of the gay and lesbian movement. But to improve, we need to face our historical struggles, and we need to make reparation and be generally better. And we can do it in the, I think, a general optimistic view of always talking good about ourselves, about others. Being critical is a good point. Being overcritical about ourselves, not really good, but being critical is great, because it gives us growth. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And likewise, I'm going to ask Sam, then Rob, to give us maybe a 1 or 2 minute closing statement, maybe a call to action if you want. And I'm partly doing this being mindful of time for the audience. So Sam, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Aurelia and Rob have already said. Like it's the challenges that we're facing, like politically now, just in general, with the rise of the far right across Europe and beyond, are enormous, and solidarity is essential to dealing with these challenges, because the amount of resources that are being poured into basically making Europe, America, other parts of the world into into like just generally like less liberal places. It's not just a backlash, it's a coordinated campaign that is trying to politically erode everything that people have been fighting for decades, like since before Stonewall. Like that there's just a lot of political struggle that is trying to be repealed by this. So it's solidarity is the essential thing. So that's all I want to say. But thank you for inviting me to say that.
Thank you. And Rob, exclamation point.
Well, that makes so much sense to me. I mean, I think solidarity is the key right now, especially with our politics. And like the only thing I would add to that was well said. The only thing I would add is that like we need to be able to find each other to have that solidarity. And I'm sure this group, like, okay, we found each other. Many of us are doing this research or posting podcasts, and we're publicly bisexual, but we're the extreme minority of this group. And a lot of the guys I work with and coaching are not out and struggling with that. And they do want to find ways to express their sexuality or their non-conformity. They're trying to find that. That's a goal for them, to not fit in, to not conform. And it's very difficult. It's something a lot of people are struggling with silently right now. And it's not seen, but it's happening. And there's so much joy that people get from expressing that and finding ways to express masculinity in non-conforming ways. Wearing nail polish is like the one quick example, but there's so many different ways to be visibly queer. And I feel like hopefully we're at a tipping point where the more that this happens, then people will see it and they'll feel comfortable. And so my call to action would be like, if you're thinking about that, take the leap, because it's not only going to benefit you most likely, but it's really important for this community and for the solidarity that we need politically.
Yeah. Well, if academic doesn't work, I also want to ask how to be a stand-up comedian like you, or like fellow Bi+ stand-up comedian Morgan Rees, or well, hopefully Taylor Tomlinson. But thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you all. Audience, please thank our panelists for the time they put in and the wonderful thoughts and experience that they brought to us. At this time, for conference purposes, there's no need to switch to yet another Zoom room. So what I'm going to do instead is ask our new Bisexual Research Group leadership teammate, Gabby, to close us out.
Sorry, I didn't realize how dark it was in my room, so I just got a flash of sunlight. So thank you to all of you in this room for being here with us after an amazing day of Bi+ stories, experiences, and community building. We would like to really, really thank all of the speakers for their tremendous work, and all the audience members that have followed us for the entirety of the day. You've all been troopers being here for so many hours straight. Thank you for engaging with each other, for all the resources you have been generously sharing in the chat and with each other, and for the good vibes that we have consistently had and experienced today. So we'll see you all tomorrow for an even more amazing day of Bi+ research and community building. And we hope to see most of you or all of you there. So ciao, and thank you very much.